Good evening, hello, test. Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. Hi, woo, yeah. Welcome to Southampton Arts Center. Woo, dramatic. I am Amy Kirwin. I'm the artistic director, and welcome all to our very first Raconteurs Evening of Storytelling. We are really, really excited to present this evening. It's a new idea for us, and both Tom Dunn and I, our executive director, been talking about it for a while and are both a fan of this type of thing, and we thought it would be fun, so here we are with 7 brave guinea pigs, so to speak. There is a little update in that I'm your host tonight. Little change in schedules at the last minute, so it's gonna be me, as that song says. It's like, gonna be me. Is that the song? All right, anyway. If I'd known I was hosting, I wouldn't have worn an old-timey jail ensemble. Like, I feel like, just lock me up now. But it's fine, I'm good. Anyway, no, it's gonna be a really fun night, and we're so happy you all are here. And I'd ask who's never been here before, but I can't see you, so don't bother raising your hand. So we are just gonna get started. If you're unaware of this format of this, essentially, it's just people telling stories, and these stories are firsts, because it's our first Raconteurs night. All of the stories revolve around something that happened to all of our storytellers for the first time. And so they're just going to tell these stories from the heart, and we hope you enjoy them. So to start it off, because you got to start big, is my dear, dear pal, Paton Miller, who is also, yay, well-deserved. He's also the curator of our East End Collected series. Yay, I hope you got a chance to see it. And he is also an incredible artist and an all-around great guy. And so Paton is going to tell you a wonderful story tonight. So ladies and gentlemen, my dear pal, Paton Miller.
Thanks for coming. After this story, you might not think I'm so wonderful. This goes back to 1970. And if you all remember, 1970 was, Vietnam War was still raging. And I was growing up in Hawaii. I was 17 years old in 1970. And I was probably the worst student in this room, for sure. And I decided to leave school, and so I took advantage of a GED program in Hawaii that after about 2 or 3 months of going to night school, you get a high school diploma. And so I had a lot of time, 2.5 years, before I eventually went to the Honolulu Academy of Arts and began my career as an artist. But for those 2.5 years, I worked, and one of the jobs I had in Hawaii was I worked for a dynamiter, and we were mostly working on the Makaha side of Oahu. And I guess I should have figured out that safety wasn't his primary concern, in that he had one leg. But I worked for him for a while, and I learned how to blow things up, and I liked that job a lot. That was a good job. And I did find out years later that he finally blew himself up. But I then, I don't know why, I decided to work trying to sell Kirby vacuum cleaners. And I was very bad at that. And I knew that job wasn't for me. One day we were driving down through downtown Honolulu, and it's hot. But I was inside of a Cadillac, my boss's Cadillac, that the windows were up and the air conditioning was on. And I was dying of hypothermia, and he was driving the car and sweating bullets. And I was curled up trying to stay warm, and it's 85 degrees outside the window. He wouldn't let me lower the windows. And then another car, like a Cadillac, comes swinging up next to him, and he's looking at him, at the driver, and the driver's looking at him, and they're looking at each other with absolute hate. And I said, "Who's that?" And he says, "That's the Electrolux manager." Well, I knew that job wasn't for me either. So I decided to fly to Los Angeles to visit my brother. He lived in a nice little quaint town called Compton. Maybe you've all heard of that. So I was at his house. I was going to stay with him for a few months. And I got the newspaper. I needed a job. And I'd worked in gas stations in Hawaii, and I saw that there was a gas station manager position. And so I decided to apply for it. So I called up, and I got an appointment. And I put on my best pair of pants the day of the appointment, and my only pair of pants. And I got on the bus, and I took the bus to downtown Los Angeles. And I got out of the bus. I was walking down the street, and I found the building. And as I was bounding up the stairs to my gas station manager appointment, my pants split from the crotch to the belt loop. Now, I don't know if anyone here ever grew up in the tropics, but people in the tropics don't wear underwear. So my ass was hanging out like a ripe melon. So it was a big staircase, and it took time to go up the stairs, but I had to kind of keep my thighs together. So I was sort of walking like this, and people were passing me, and then I'd hear them laugh. I could have gone home, but I have a certain thing about time and being on time. It's a neurosis. I'm an artist, but I'm always on time. It's because I have no schedule. You have to be scheduled if you have no schedule. So I decided to carry on because I thought, well, I'll go to the appointment, I'll walk in, sit down, have the appointment, and then I'll make my way out. And so I walk in, and sure enough, there's a receptionist, and I boldly walk up to her, as proud as can be, and I announce my arrival. And she says, well, Mr. Miller, sit down. You have a few minutes. And so I then realized that I had to back away from her. And she looked at me like I was insane. And so I sat down, and then a few minutes later, a door opened up. And out of the door comes a guy that looks just like Ratso Rizzo. I swear, he could have been a doppelganger for Dustin Hoffman in that role. And he shakes hands with a guy who obviously is the boss of the gas station. And I'm thinking, well, my turn's coming up. And so a few minutes later, the receptionist says, Mr. Miller, you can go in that door. So I imagine that I'm going to open the door, and in that room will be a man sitting behind a desk. And I'll have no problem. I'll be able to just sit down at the desk and have the appointment and get the job. I needed the job. So I walk to the door, and I open it up. And it's not a small room with a desk. It's a big conference room with an oval desk. And there's about 4 or 5 partners there. And I'm standing there looking at them. And they said, well, come over here and sit down. And so I'm coming in at 6 o'clock on the clock, and they want me to sit at 1 o'clock, which means I got this problem with the pants. So I walk in, and I keep my back to the wall. And I'm knocking, there's pictures of gas stations on the wall, and I'm knocking them asunder. And I get to 1 o'clock, where my chair is, and I fly into it. I literally leap into it. No, these are grown men, and their time is important to them, and they're looking at me like I'm completely insane. And they pretty much tell me to leave, and I say, okay, and I decide it doesn't matter now, so I give them my ass. And as I walked out the door, I heard them all burst out in laughter. And I walk out, and I don't care about the receptionist anymore either. And I'm on the front steps of that building, and all of a sudden the main guy, comes up and grabs me. And he goes, that's the funniest thing we've ever seen. He goes, do you want a job? And I said, yeah, that's why I came. And he goes, look, buddy, you're too young to be the manager, but if you want to pump gas, you got a job. So I took the job. Mission completed. Okay. So day of the job arrives, and I get on the bus. I go down to Paramount and Compton Boulevards, which are 8 lanes each direction, thousands of cars going by every second. And on the corner of this very important intersection is 2 to 3 acres of macadam and the shittiest looking gas station you've ever seen. Now, I know something about gas stations. I worked in them a lot. Back when, full service gas station, you vacuum the cigarettes at. You drive it to the car wash. I do it all. I worked for Sam Spoon, Chevron, and Wildlife, and he told my father I was the best Howley he ever had. Howley's a white kid. Anyways, I was proud of my gas station work. So I go into the gas station, and Razzo Rizzo is the manager. He got the job. And so I really don't like this guy. I don't know what it is about his face, but it didn't bode well. So I started pumping gas, and time's going by, and I'm working mostly on weekends, 3 or 4 days a week. And he keeps telling me that my math is wrong, that I'm selling more gas than there's money, and then he's charging me for it. And after a while, I realized that the guy's probably ripping me off. So I have my sister-in-law come down, and we do a count, and we get it down to the perfect penny. Absolutely perfect. And sure enough, the next week, he pulls that same stunt, and I realize that I'm out about $75, a fortune to me in those days. And so I'm thinking about how I'm going to get my money back one day as I was sitting in this gas station with almost nobody ever buying gas because it was so sickly looking. And 2 guys come in, tall guy with a fedora and a short guy without a fedora. And the tall guy with the fedora, he asked me for some kerosene. He's got a kerosene can in his hand. And we had kerosene in the back in barrels. So I went into the back with him and gave him the kerosene. And before I could duck, he hit me over the head with it. And then he tied me up in a very hastily way, and they left with the money. So I rolled out into the macadam, and I thought a car would come in real fast. But nobody stopped. I was laying there on the macadam for, 4, 5, 10 minutes, I couldn't tell you. But I saw cars going by on Compton Boulevard looking at me. Kids in the back of station wagons going, Mom. So finally a guy pulls in, goes to the complete opposite end of the parking lot, and then comes out and he's dressed in leather. And he's walking towards me, cinching up his leather gloves. And I'm thinking, this isn't going well at all. And he shows up in front of me, and he looks down at me. And I'm looking up at him, and I'm thinking, he's going to drag me back into the gas station. And he takes a knife out, and he cuts me loose. And off he goes. So I call the cops. And the cops come, and I swear to God, they look just like the guys on Dragnet. And the cops thought I did it. They thought it was an inside job, right? Well, there's only one thing wrong with this story. It was an inside job. I robbed myself. I had Kenny, my neighbor, who was the local pot dealer and a pretty good accordion player. He was really very good with that accordion. Come and rob me and tie me up. And you guys said you wanted a first. Well, this is my life of crime. And it was my first and my last life of crime. And I'd like to thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Paton. I highly doubt that was your last time. I don't know. I know you, and I think I'm sure there's been an incident here or there. For those of you who are late, I'm Adam Green. No, I'm not. I have taken his place for the evening. I'm Amy Kirwin, and deal with it. Thank you. Thank you, Paton. Thank you for sharing your story. Next up, we have a tale of retail therapy from Ninatchka Dec, who is a photographer, a podcast producer, what's the other thing? A cookie baker, and a natural blonde. I did remember that in the notes. Anyway, so ladies and gentlemen, some retail therapy from Ninatchka Dec.
I thought if Amy said that I was a natural blonde, it would make me less nervous. But apparently not. My mother was dying of ovarian cancer, but what really killed her is that I was working at Banana Republic at the time. That's a true story. She was a smart cookie, and that was a phrase that she used to describe clever women who could make good choices at a moment's notice. And at 74, she was a feminist and a liberal and a bomb-banning, anti-war protesting, Nixon-hating intellectual who loved her coffee black and her L&M cigarettes mild and tasty. So she just couldn't understand why her 34-year-old daughter, okay, it was a little bit of time ago, her 34-year-old daughter, who seemed to have the same kind of fire, had given up her highfalutin college education, her 7 sisters' college education that she paid for herself, to work in a store where she was pinning cuffs and selling shirts for a living. Where had she gone so terribly wrong? Every day I would go into the back stockroom and call her from this ancient wall phone that was sort of packed in between shoes and shirts and sometimes cookies when I was very lucky. And I'd ring her up and I'd say, "Hey, Mom, how you doing?" And she'd say, "Where are you calling from?" I admired her optimism. And then I would tell her that I was at work. And then I would wait for this, what I always knew would happen, this long silence, and then sort of this slow, raspy whistle that was the sound that she made when she sort of sucked air into her teeth and over her partials a little bit. I used to call that the suck of shame. And I had heard that sound many times before. The night that I did not want to go to my prom stag after none of the boys had invited me. The afternoon when I told her that I was going to marry my boyfriend of 5 years. So things turned around a little bit for me. But her response was, "Why do you want to go and do a thing like that?" She had been divorced and middle-aged, and the whole thing had lost its appeal for her. But at that point, I longed to hear anything from her, any kind of response, anything to help me through that period. I wanted to tell her that I was terrified to live the bulk of my life, my adult life, without her. How could I get through that? I had questions about the future. I wanted to tell her that I had started dreaming about my father again, whose death 14 years earlier had marked my undergraduate experience with this sort of indelible stain of loss. But she didn't want to do that. She didn't want to talk to me now. She just wanted to sit in her Florida den with blackout curtains, truly, to black out this glorious sun in view, to play computer solitaire and watch movies on TCM. So, right around that time at Banana Republic, this woman walked in with her daughter. And let me just say, as an aside, Banana Republic was very cult-like. Everything, I don't know if you remember Banana Republic that was in Bridgehampton, but everything we all said as sales associates was scripted, all of it, depending upon what we were selling that day, what we were trying to promote. And all of the clothing was measured and had to be a certain height, but we could only have 6 in a stack. All the stacks had to be a certain distance apart, and there were only a certain amount of stacks that were allowed to be on each table. The tables had to be a certain distance apart, and then we were parked in different parts of that store, and we were not allowed to leave those areas unless we were retrieving something. And I thought about that experience while I was there kind of like a secret agent, kind of like an anthropologist, gathering information about the sort of the really inappropriate retail habits of the rich and famous, which was super fun. And I will just say as an aside, Julie Andrews, who used to come to that store a lot, was lovely. Lovely. So she beat any kind of cliche that anybody else she was just beyond. But that's another story for another day. So this woman and her daughter were coming toward me. And Banana had this thing called Impact, which was identify. This is so long ago, and I still remember this. Identify, make an approach, personalize, add on, close, and thank you. And I was a really high producer there because I had a secret, which was that I told people my name. That was it. I would just say, hi, I'm Nina. If you need anything, just let me know. And when they would ask, who helped you today? It was me. So I was ready. Like, I had my impact on. I was in the middle of the store. I was on it. I was game to go. And she came over to me, the daughter. She had just graduated from law school, and she was looking for, she needed to wardrobe herself because she had taken a job with Al Gore as he made his run for the presidency. And she had a shirt in her hand, and she approached me, and she said, can you get this for me in a medium? Like I did not understand the word. And I had a moment, and I said, sure. I took her little medium, and I went into the back room, and I started muttering. And I think it was super loud because my manager could hear me in the back of the store. And I was like going through shirts and throwing things around because it was a really stocked room, lots of merchandise back there, looking for this stupid medium. And I was thinking to myself, I could go to law school if I wanted to. I went to Wellesley College. I cross-registered at MIT. I was a public radio producer. I interviewed, like, Richard Linklater. And then I was, like, beet red, because I can't hide anything on my face. And I came back out, and I delivered her medium. But that encounter stayed with me for long after that experience ended. And I thought that I was working in a retail graveyard, really, so that I'd have the ability to fly down to Boca Raton and take my mom for her cancer treatments every month, and then fly back up here and take my mother-in-law for the same cancer treatments here. But what was really happening was that I was sort of losing myself, but I didn't realize it at the time. I was kind of evaporating, like on that flight over the coastline, 35,000 feet up in the air, just kind of losing myself and my fire and my drive and my sense of the future. And I liken that time in my life to being on a bicycle with no brakes, careening down the side of a mountain, and all I could do was hang on. So one day, while I was straightening clothing and sort of doing that kind of fascist, perfect line of sweaters, I started to think about Miss Medium's mom. She was a tall woman with sort of that beige blonde Hamptons do, really beautiful, gray eyes. And I thought about how I think maybe that might be me too. Although I wasn't blonde then. But that's neither here nor there. I thought about her and what she might say to me if she were my mom, Because she was so filled with pride, it's like this tacit approval as her daughter was sort of buying smart shoes and stylish suits. So I thought, wow, what would she say to me? You're strong. You can do it. Don't give up. Stick with it. You're worth it. Your life will be better than this. So I wrote all that down in let me just say, I'm the most anti-Oprah person on the planet, but I did it. And it was such an Oprah thing to do. I wrote all of those affirmations down and I said them to myself every morning, or when I was walking, or when I was driving. And pretty soon, I started to believe it. And then pretty soon after that, I started to remember what it was like to be somebody's girl. After that, I called my mom one morning, and before I even had a chance to say hello, I just said, Ma, I'm going to grad school. And the words just sort of tumbled out. And I was super freaked out because I knew what was going to come next. I was waiting, and there was a long silence, but no raspy whistle, no suck of shame. She sort of whispered into the phone and said, if you go, I will help you. You're a smart cookie. You can do anything. I hung up that phone, and in that moment, I felt an intangible sort of shift of energy, like the end of one thing and the beginning of something else. And I walked out into the morning light, and I stood in the parking lot in that light for a long time. And I felt like this sick ache kind of rise up through me, right up through here, up through my head, and then poof, it was gone. What I realized in that moment was that my withdrawn, reticent mother hadn't given up on me, hadn't abandoned me. She was still there. She just, and she had wanted for me what she had always wanted for me, which was a life defined by what I wanted for myself. But she just couldn't say it to me in the way in which I needed her to or wanted her to. And she wanted to, and of course we never had this discussion, but this is my hope. She wanted me to learn this lesson in this moment in an indelible way. She wanted me to stand on my own for the first time in a way that would mark me and empower me for the rest of my life so that I could do that in any situation, so that nothing was off limits to me, so I could have the life that I wanted. So, and also I just would like to add, and I thought about grace in that moment, the meaning of it, this idea that life is ever-changing and sort of our role in it is also ephemeral. So my mom, that was in January, and I applied to school, and my mom died at the end of January. And 2 weeks after her death, I took the entrance exam to Columbia J School, journalism school, in the Pulitzer office, with a woman on the phone to her mother the entire time, which was interesting. And when I did go to school, when I attended Columbia, I thought about her so much because the people I encountered there were remarkable. My classmates, all of these extraordinary teachers I had, people who came and spoke to us in the lecture, people from whom I learned, who I got to interview. And she never saw me get in, she never saw me attend, never saw me graduate, obviously. And then after grad school, it's quite some time now, I've worked as a journalist where I made documentary films for the Smithsonian Institution, and I did this project at NBC, which was specifically about empowering children so that they could go off and learn how to learn in a way so that they could take that with them in any environment. And I've also interviewed lots of different people. Athletes, civil rights people, artists, directors, writers, janitors, homeless people, sick people, disenfranchised gay men. And the interesting thing is that now, when I think what my mom would say about it, I hear my voice in my head as much as I wish I could remember hers. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina, for that beautiful story. I'm gonna go call my mom. I'm gonna call my mother. If she calls me during this, I will have to leave the room because she will worry immediately if I don't that something is wrong, and she'll be calling the hospital and the police station and Jewish mothers. She passed that on to me too. I'm a worrier too. But that's a beautiful story, as I said. Next up, we have somebody, I don't know him. He's like new to the scene. Oh, he's my boss. Oh, see, that's the message in the ear bit, you know. You know that one? No. Anyway, this is Tom Dunn, who is our executive director here at Southampton Arts Center. He's been here for a year now. Woohoo! Tom came to us for many years at Lincoln Center. He's also a screenwriter, dare I say, a humorist, a all-around good guy, and I enjoy getting to partner in crime here with him. And tonight, Tom is, because I didn't want to be first telling a story, but here I am anyway doing it. He's going to be telling a story called The Drop-Off. Tom Dunn, everyone.
Okay, I'm going to take you back to the year 2000. My writing partner and I had just finished writing our first spec television project. Now, to be clear, no one asked for, commissioned, or hired us to do such a thing. Rather, we did so with the hope of sparking some interest, which, for two young, agentless writers from New York, 3,000 miles from Los Angeles, I can assure you is a very tall order. I thought to myself, who am I going to get to read this thing? I had read recently, this is back in 2000, that two TV legends were starring on Broadway together, Henry Winkler and John Ritter, in a new Neil Simon comedy. I was going to take my script and personally deliver it to Winkler and Ritter at the Music Box Theater. Now this is, as I said, 20 years ago. I was a kid, a starving artist, living in New York, hanging out in comedy clubs and black box theaters. It was a very special, memorable time in my life. It was about this time also that I started temping at Lincoln Center, as Amy kindly noted, where I would then actually work for the better part of the next 2 decades. So I thought to myself, if I'm going to deliver my script to these legends, I'm going to do so in a Lincoln Center envelope, right? I thought it might entice them to actually open it. Okay, Wednesday, November 22nd, 2000, day of the drop-off. My plan was to deliver the script between the matinee and evening performances where I felt I had captive targets. It was the day before Thanksgiving. My writing partner and I got out of work early. We were hanging out at my apartment on the Upper West Side. We had some time to kill. We had a big sandwich, a few adult beverages. We then fell hard into a Law & Order marathon on TNT. So much so that we almost missed the delivery window. And were it not for a particularly jarring episode where Jill Hennessy gets killed by a drunk driver, I don't think this would have happened. So anyway, so now we're, spoiler alert, sorry, but so now we're rushing down to the theater on 45th Street. I go to the box office, and huge mistake. There's a huge line. There's people everywhere, tourists. I finally get to the front, and I'm informed that all deliveries must be made to the stage door. Of course, makes sense. So I leave the theater. I walk halfway down the block into an alley where I find the stage door. I knock. Nothing. I knock again. No answer. Finally, I see a secret hidden bell that I ring. I ring the bell, and I was greeted by the most intimidating stagehand that I had ever seen before. I announced that I was a delivery person, and I was here with packages for Mr. Winkler and Mr. Ritter. He took the packages. I made the delivery. I got the hell out of there as quickly as I possibly could. From there, I went about my life and business as usual, expected nothing to come of it. That is until 6 days later, when to my shock and utter delight, my gigantic first-generation cell phone rings. And who do you think it is? No, I'm asking, who do you think it is? Winkler or Ritter? Of course, it's Henry Winkler. The Fonz had called me Tom Dunn. Unbelievable. What I didn't know and what I was literally about to learn is that Henry Winkler had a very well-known reputation. He is, without question or equal, the nicest man in show business. But here's the great part. I missed his call. He left me a voicemail. I proceeded to play that voicemail for everybody that I met for a very long time. Finally, I work up the courage to return the call, and he not only read the material, but his insights on it were as specific as they were actionable. He told me that we were overtelling some of our jokes, and he told me which one. We talked about character development and story structure and what makes a great pilot. And of course, he was right about everything. A great ending to the story would be that we sold that show. It ran for many years. We became best friends with Henry Winkler, often vacationing together, but of course that's not the case. We did stay in touch over the years, and he was always very, very kind and generous with his feedback on other scripts and material. So there it is, you know, the first time I delivered a script to an actor at a theater. By the way, it wasn't the only time I did that. Over the next couple of years, I also personalized and hand-delivered scripts to Danny DeVito, Ralph Macchio, Kiefer Sutherland, Jeff Goldblum, former Doobie Brothers frontman Michael McDonald. I heard from a few of them, by the way. But, oh, by the way, I still have a stack of Lincoln Center envelopes. If any of you want to give this a try, I would welcomely share them with you. But, so yeah, a couple of firsts. The first time I wrote a pilot. First time I wrote a real script. It was the first time that I spoke to an icon, only to learn that he was just a kind, generous, regular guy. And finally, and most importantly, due to the generosity and encouraging feedback of one Henry Winkler, it was the first time that I felt like a real writer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. I was thinking that if he gets a hit on one of those scripts, there might be a job opening. So I don't want, no. He'll stick around. It's cool. Next up, we have a multi-platform reporter for the East Hampton Independent and the host of WPPB's Heart of the East End. Giana Volpe is also, interestingly enough, a boxer. She is a licensed security guard, and she is a bouncer. So she's scrappy, I think is safe to say. And she is just freshly back as of yesterday from Italy, and it was her first time going to Italy, so she will be telling us this tale of her first trip to Italy. Giana Volpe.
Pulling a Paton here. Hi guys, how's it going? I'm Giana Volpe, and yes, I just came back from Italy. It was my first time. There were a lot of firsts. My first time eating prosciutto for breakfast. My first time badly faking a language and feeling super sexy about it. My first time accidentally leaning against a Da Vinci painting and then feeling more valuable afterward. And my first time accidentally ordering myself a liter of wine for dinner when I'd only wanted a glass. So yeah, a lot of firsts. It was an awesome trip, and I went with my father. My father, who I think he said bomb 1,400 times on the trip, and 1,397 of them were on the airport security line at JFK before we'd even left the country. Yeah, I grew up a lot in the last 10 days. I'm finally an adult, having all these adult thoughts, like, what the hell am I doing here? What the hell am I doing here? You know, that's the problem with firsts. Like, how do I unsee that place? How do I save my American soul now that I've seen the promised land? And the answer is, I don't. I'm ruined now. I can't unsee the most incredible architecture I've ever laid eyes on. I can't untaste the most beautiful continental breakfast that my mouth has ever known. And I can't untouch that Da Vinci, mi dispiace, signor, mi dispiace. I didn't hear the alarm going off because I was taking a picture of my father with Leonardo's diving suit. That was the real other first, was realizing for the first time, you know, as a woman who hasn't yet married or had her children, what they mean when they say that all men are little boys, and what it's like to travel to another country with one alone. It's like the best, worst time you've ever had, and you'll almost die the entire time, but at least you'll die laughing. It was like that. Besides saying bomb, 1,397 times in the airport line, he also carried around a wallet so stuffed with cash that it couldn't close, and then he insisted not only on randomly counting it, but yelling out the amounts on every street corner, at every train station, at every airport that we encountered in 6 cities for 10 whole days. And why? Because he was baiting thieves. Baiting them. You have no idea how stressful it is to be the bodyguard of someone who's actively trying to get robbed. I'm hypervigilant as it is. Right now, standing here, I'm thinking, worrying that my father is out there somewhere incorporating his social security number into a karaoke song, seeding his lawn with diamonds, and making it rain every time he smells a con artist in the area. Thanking baby Jesus, at least his shoes aren't cool enough to steal. I bought these in Milan. I didn't wear them in Milan. And neither did he. I remember the first time I caught 2 thieves sizing him up in Milan. I said, Dad, did you see those 2 guys? He's like, oh yeah, I saw them. And I was like, you were looking down, counting your money, and then they noticed your shoes were these basic ass black sneakers, and they decided, no, forget about him. But he said, no, it was because I gave them a mean look. It wasn't the look, guys. Nobody wanted to wear them. Not even your friendly neighborhood waitstaff would wear these black shoes, no matter how nice the soles were. And if it weren't for me catching the other guy in Milan while my dad was making me take profile pics of him in an alleyway at night, I would have had to do something, because I was doing like these crazy calculations, like how fast he was gaining on us versus how like if we could make it to the hotel. I had about 100 yards. That guy had a doctorate in larceny, and my father, once we got back to the hotel room, went back outside and taunted him for several minutes like a grown-ass man. So now I don't even want to be a mother anymore. The dream is dead, people. You can stop thinking about how cute my babies are going to be, because I'm done. And no, Dad, that bald eagle baseball cap doesn't make you look tough. It makes you look like a mark. So if you wear it in the train station, known for its 14-year-old gang of robbers, I'm going to have to step in and get stabbed, because my job is to protect you no matter what you do. Now, a few days later, we actually killed a thief together. We were in Firenze, eating prosciutto for breakfast. He was drinking Ace Detox. I was gingerly sipping espresso. And he turned and he said, Gianna, last night I had this dream. I was baiting 2 thieves. That's where my PTSD kicked in. I started to squeeze my espresso so hard I thought I was going to crush the little ceramic cup. But then he said, but then I felt bad about it. So we went back to apologize. Then I felt like a really victorious mom. I was like, hey, look at this guy. My lectures are finally working. But I forgot that all men are little boys. And this one has a very, very active imagination, because what he said next was, so then they started chasing us. And the first one had this giant spinning sledgehammer, and he threw it right at us. So I grabbed a pitchfork and I stabbed him in the face. Totally normal breakfast conversation for us, by the way. I was not even fazed. I was like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, what were you supposed to do? He had a giant spinning sledgehammer. And he was like, I know, it was a clean kill, you know? I didn't want him to suffer. And I'm like, well, of course not. You did the right thing. So then he said that I found a sword in a barrel nearby. How lucky am I? And together, we killed that second thief. So, another first. I thought I was just going to meet my Italian blood. No, I spilled some without even trying. And I'm not complaining. It was an incredible trip. Mind-blowing every step of the way. I saw Michelangelo's David for the first time. I saw his enormous hands and his butt. And I learned about how all the streets are lined with dead people waiting to go to heaven, and how the Duomo in Milan is 500 years old, and how much I love my father. No matter how many times he says the B word in the airport, which is what he was calling it at the end, nor the fact that he left his plane ticket in the security bin and walked away. Thank you guys so much. You've been awesome. That was so fun, Amy.
Prosciutto for breakfast. We had pasta for dinner, and now I want more pasta. So good. I want to go to Italy. But I can eat prosciutto for breakfast here too, I guess. So, yeah, I could. Maybe I will. Thank you, Gianna, for your lovely story. Next up, we have a really fantastic young gentleman from the Shinnecock Nation, Shane Weeks. Yes, Shane Weeks is a cultural consultant, an incredible storyteller, incredibly knowledgeable, and just a wonderful, wonderful person. So we're really lucky to have him tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Shane Weeks.
Hakoi, Bijiki Nabaut, and also is Bijiki and Dodem, Shinnecock Wache, and Shinabininu. Hello, my name is Standing Buffalo. I'm of the Buffalo Clan. I'm an Anishinaabe man from Shinnecock. And today I'm going to tell you guys a story about the first time I was a part of an intertribal ceremony for a beached whale. And just to give you a little history about what the whale means to my people. Our people were traditionally whalers, and we would go out miles and sometimes for days, 15, 20, 30, 40 miles out, and harvest these whales. And we had canoes that could hold like 100 people that would go out there and brave the seas. And for many thousands of years, our people sustained ourselves off of the whales. And not only did we go out there and harvest them, but we also utilized the whales that washed up on these shores here on Long Island. And in our traditional way, when a whale washed up, it was seen as a good thing, right? Because our people could live off of them for quite some time, months, by smoking it, boiling it, preserving it. And so it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. And when I say that, you have to kind of think also that whale beachings has happened for thousands of years. It's long before there was pollution, long before there were motorboats. And so it was just a natural part of the circle of life. And so today, we're starting to see more beachings. And it's because we have whales in our community now. We have whales in our waters. And for quite some time, about 100 years, there weren't many whales in the waters here. And how that happened, how that came about, was during what I call the Second Industrial Revolution. Right? The first one was timber. During the time of colonization, the beginning of colonization here in North America, when the settlers came, they cut most of our trees down and shipped them to Europe. So that was the first industrial revolution. The second was the whaling industry. And our people, being master whalers, were heavily involved in the whaling industry, usually as slaves or indentured servants or employees on paper but never got paid. But our people were very much on almost every single whaling boat here in the New England area. And in fact, my great-great-great-grandfather was one of only two that I know of Native American whalers on this side that made it to actually be captain of a boat and travel the world. But during that time, during the whaling industry, a lot of the whales were killed off. And the elders that I know that are alive today say, growing up, they never saw a whale in our waters. So it was quite some time that our people were able to practice these ceremonies that we now do today. Partly because of the lack of whales in our waters, but also because of the laws that were imposed against our people. We weren't allowed to practice our culture, our traditions, our language up until the 1970s, after what was known as the American Indian Movement or the AIM movement. And it wasn't until that time, which was the equivalent of the civil rights movement for Native Americans, that we were even legally allowed to do these ceremonies. So the first whale that I had ever seen, dead or alive, was in 2005. And I just remember getting out of school and going down to go see it. And one of our elders was knee-deep in the whale, cutting the baleen out for our people. And I still remember that scene today, in the whale's mouth, just cutting all the baleen out. But there was a huge gap in that time between that whale and the next whale that I saw beached on Long Island. And even at that time, there wasn't a real ceremony that we did. I guess that was in 2012, the next one I saw. And then in 2016, a whale washed up in Hart's Cove in Mauritius. And there was a lot of media coverage around it. And this particular whale washed up and it was still alive. And, there were pictures all over social media of the tail coming out of the water. And where Hart's Cove area is close to the Unkachug territory, a reservation called Puspatuck in Mastic or Mauritius. And so myself, the chief of the Unkachug, Harry Wallace, and an Ojibwe man who grew up on Shinnecock, Gnu, went out and did a ceremony for the whale. And this was the first time that I remember our people holding a ceremony for a beached whale, intertribally. And so, we found a little corner away from the crowd that was there watching the whale, and we performed this ceremony. And we sang a song that had just recently come back to us, remembered by one of our elders. That was a water song. And it was a very a deep experience because we were able to freely express that and who we were. And eventually, it took quite some time for that whale to actually die. It took, I almost want to say it took about a week before they actually decided to euthanize it. And, but since that time, there have been more and more whales showing up in our waters. The first whale, technically that whale was alive, but the first whale I saw swimming and alive, I used to work on a boat also up until this past fall. And the first whale I saw was out in the ocean in front of West Hampton. And I just remember seeing it come up and the spout, coming up out the water. And my captain, every time we would see a whale, he would go, there she blows. And I'd go, in my language, Poto, So, but I started seeing them almost every time we went out. And he was like, I don't know how you see all these whales. I could go out here for years and never see a whale. And you come out here every single day and you see a whale, And he's like, I'm going to start calling you the whale whisperer. So I started realizing that maybe there was something to that, that maybe there was a message that the whales had to give, not just for me, right, but for my people, for all of us here, right, because we all live here now. And so since that first whale, there have been many more beachings happening. And I think it's because there's just many more whales in our waters. It's by seeing them every day, I know that there's a lot from not seeing any at all. And so since that first whale we did a ceremony at, almost every beached whale, from Montauk to Queens, I've been at to do a ceremony. And I've negotiated with the feds, with NOAA, with the local municipalities, the local, not enforcement, but AMCS, who does the necropsy, that they would contact Shinnecock directly when a whale washes ashore, so that way we can be there to do our ceremony and do what we need to do for the whale, as we have traditionally. And I am also the contact person for Shinnecock, so that we can get that done. And so it's been pretty intense, to know that I have to carry this on. That elder who I mentioned knee deep in that first whale in 2005, he told me he's passing the torch on to me to be able to take care of the whales and to be able to do these things for our people. And so for me, that's something I know that hopefully I can carry on in a good way to be able to pass that on to the next generation, and that our ways, our traditions can continue into the future. And it's a good feeling, to know that we're now able to express ourselves freely, where people who are still alive, remember when we couldn't. And so just recently, in the last 6 months or so, now I've been getting a sort of recognition, I guess, for that work that I feel I do for my people, right? And I've been, Fox 5 did a segment on me last year, some local newspapers, just yesterday or the day before, something like that, Newsday did a segment on me, doing the ceremony for the whales. But for me, it's much more than that, right? It's for my people. It's for the future generations. And as long as I'm able to pass that down to even if it's just one person on Shinnecock, that's what it's all about for me. And traditionally, as I mentioned, the whales, they sustained us. They gave us nutrients, but they also gave us spiritual strength, right? And with the whales returning to our waters, to our areas, our people can also feel the strength coming with them. And we're able now to stand up as the whales are coming forth as well. And as one of my elders put it just the other day, the whales are coming home. So that's how we feel. That's how we feel about them. And I hope that they stay here, for all of us. So, thank you.
Thank you, Shane. I guess if I'm doing this, then I need to share a little first about myself, which is that I moved here 10 years ago. I am a big city girl. I grew up in California and Los Angeles, and I lived in New York City for 15 years. And when I moved here, I was not accustomed to a small town life. It took a lot of getting used to, and really only in the past few years have I actually kind of gotten accustomed to it. But I was trained to drive by my dad, who's from Brooklyn, and when you live in LA and you're driving, you generally need to have your wits about you and when you learn from a Brooklynite how to drive, you tend to be aggressive. And I am very aggressive when I drive, and I'm impatient and kind of that way just in general, I think. So when I first moved out here and I started driving after 15 years of not driving, I found myself getting a little frustrated. And I was driving one day, and the first time somebody cut me off out here, I got pissed, and I did this at them, and I gave them the finger, and then I realized I knew them. Yeah, so that was a first for me, being, known in a community when generally that doesn't happen in New York, and even if you do that in New York City, nobody cares. In LA, they're too busy, like just, whatever, doing this, and they don't pay attention. But yes, so my first was one of my many firsts was that that was the first time that I realized that I could not live an anonymous life anymore, and that with my husband being in the fire department and me starting to know people, that I couldn't just flip the bird willy-nilly every time I got pissed off at a bad driver, which happens a lot. So if you see me driving around looking a little tense, it's because I've got my hand chained to the door so that I don't let the finger fly. But that's a little first for me. Just a little tidbit about me. Thanks, guys. Yeah. But I do love to drive anyway. So next up, we have Minerva Perez. Give it up for Minerva. Woo! Minerva is, she is sometimes an actor. She is a mom to a 22-year-old daughter. She is the caregiver to her mother. She is also a social justice advocate and the director of OLA of Eastern Long Island, and an incredibly wonderful and impressive and important person in our community. And just another thank you, Minerva, for doing this, and it's so wonderful to have you here. So ladies and gentlemen, Minerva Perez. Oh, wait, microphone. Minerva is doing a piece about the first time she dressed a dead body.
The lilac one. That one. She'd point, half joking, but I knew she really meant it. It was the dress. Silk, cut on the bias with a diagonal ruffle across the chest. It was the one. I was sitting on her bed in her overheated Surfside, Florida home where she and my mother had been living for 25 years, and she was pointing at the closet, and I was about to bring her and my mom to live with me in Sag Harbor, 2006, November. And she would make sure that I packed absolutely everything, every piece of paper, every paid invoice from 1985, every tchotchke, but especially that dress. My grandmother was surviving her fourth kind of cancer, cervical, left breast, right breast, and now advanced metastatic breast cancer. And surgeons and oncologists, coupled with the care of my 60-year-old mentally ill mother, was finally too much for her, and so the strongest woman in the world, to me, was going to allow me to care for her. I was 5 years old when my grandmother and my grandfather moved my mother and I to live with them from New York City. The psychiatrist said that my mother was paranoid schizophrenic, but it was 1971, South Florida, so the best they had was shock therapy and a lot of Thorazine. My grandparents were not ready for raging mental illness and a first grader, but they never gave up. My grandmother fought to get me out of a foster care system when my mother had run off with me and got caught hitchhiking in Boston on the side of the highway at night and then proceeded to resist arrest. So it took my grandmother a couple of months fighting back and forth, Boston, Florida, but she brought me home, and she brought my mother home. My grandfather once tracked us down when my mother ran away again with me to a Hare Krishna camp deep in some hidden compound in Florida, just days before they were going to give us new names, send us off to Philly, and teach us how to work in airports. My grandparents were not average grandparents, so they loved us even when love was an act of combat more than an expression of tenderness. My grandmother was a dancer and a singer in her dreams. But in reality, she worked for 30 years at the Dade County Sheriff's Office as a deputy secretary. But she loved art and music and theater, and she shared that with me. When my grandfather died when I was 15 years old, she endured the most unimaginable grief and still cared for her volatile, mentally ill daughter and her teenage granddaughter. She shared that love of music and theater with my daughter as well, and she came to love this house in Sag Harbor, this light-filled home that we created together. Theater friends, music friends, my daughter's 9-year-old friends, neighbors. There was always a bustle in the house, and my grandmother was always singing. Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald. My mother even was able to find peace in not being the center of my grandmother's very intense, overprotective love. And when my grandmother told me that she did not want to die in a hospital, I took that as my sole mission. Quick trips to the doctor and back. I learned how to care for her 2 nephrostomy tubes that led to her kidneys and then drained out the urine into these bags that attached to her calves. I became almost obsessively good at taking care of her colostomy bag. That was very active, several times a day. Because I was going to make sure that there was not going to be any infection at those sites that could possibly admit her to a hospital. I even clipped the DNR, the little purple bracelet, off of her wrist and got her out of Southampton Hospital back home. I fought every moment to make sure that she had quality of life and quantity of life. I didn't take any medication for granted. I took detailed notes, asked millions of questions, and I endured looks from well-meaning professionals who thought I just couldn't handle the loss, when really I knew that my grandmother wanted every single second, and I was going to be fierce to make sure that she got every one of them. She held on a very long time, didn't even want the morphine most of the time. She preferred to be lucid. My grandmother died 2 days after her 89th birthday, June 26, 2008, in her bedroom in Sag Harbor. My boyfriend at the time cared very much for her. He would even take care of her when I was at work. He loved her deeply, and so I knew that he would help me do what I had to do. First, we took time to sit with her body, and send her spirit off with love. It was odd to see her there without any life. She was never so still or so quiet naturally. But seeing her body separated out from the complicated, vibrant life force that was Dorothy was a gift that has stayed with me for a long time. She was never just her body. She was a divine spirit filled with love, and that spirit was passed into anyone who knew her. But now, there was this body in the house and a promise in the air that dictated what happened next. I took the lilac silk dress out of her closet, and only then did I realize it didn't have a zipper. Just a little tiny button in the back of the neck opening. But the cremation people were coming soon, and I was not going to let her leave that house in that nightgown or that dingy housecoat. So we stood on either side of her, looking at each other, squinting, dumbfounded, but determined. We plotted out the undressing and all the angles, but we were fully unprepared for the arms. She hadn't been dead that long, so she was still rather malleable, but it's not the same thing. So we gathered up the dress around the neck opening and were so relieved when her head was all the way through. And then we thought, well, what do we do with the left arm? No, took the dress back over her head, thought about it some more. Then we tried putting the dress on over her head and trying to simultaneously get her arms in through the respective armholes. But even though she had lost a lot of weight the last several months, the silk material wasn't giving an inch, so we had to take that off again. And then we tried the right arm and almost over the head, and then at this point we are sweating, we're laughing, we are on the floor with that horrible kind of laugh. You can't even imagine what's going on. And all the while apologizing to Graham, not in this body, but out there somewhere watching us make this horrible, horrible mess of the situation. And then finally we have her head in and her left arm bent all the way back over her head, and then there's just a couple of inches to go before her elbow's gonna get through this material, and it's gonna be okay, but it's not happening yet. And we're pushing and are holding our breath and our eyes popping out to please, please, please don't let me break this arm, or God, please don't let this pop in any way at all. And oh my God, no, 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 no. And then her arm was in. Her left arm was in. Her right arm was in. Her head was in this dress. I shimmied the dress the rest of the way over her body, all the way, and I stood back and I admired my grandmother's choice. Not for the soft color or the feminine ruffle, but for the work that came with it. One final lesson for me to take in. There will be nothing worth having that isn't worth fighting for. There will be no joy that hasn't been touched by sadness. And there will be love, but only if you choose love. And it will never, ever be easy. Thank you.
I don't want to talk after that. So good. Good job. That was a very special story. Thank you for sharing that. We have one final storyteller this evening, and this one is somebody I love very much. She was an artist here recently as part of our Takeover exhibition, and I only met her because of that, thanks to my fairy godmother, Irene Tully, who's here tonight. Hi, Irene. Ruby Jackson is, she is a wonderful artist who works in glitter and clay and everything. She's just vibrant and fun, and she's been an actor, she's been a comedian, she's just a character in general. She is just everything that you want to love about somebody. So Ruby is going to tell our final story of the evening, and it's The Eggs and I, told by Ruby Jackson. Come on up, Ruby.
This story is about the first time that I was caught lying to my mother. The lie was about a hard-boiled egg, and it was first of many lies about everything in the food pyramid except for raw vegetables and candy. Now, my mother's idea of child raising meant that you eat everything on your plate before you can leave the table. And breakfast every day is an egg, which I hated, toast, which was okay, and milk, which made me sick to my stomach. This diet went on for years. I was 2.5 at the time of the egg incident. I think I couldn't swallow another egg. I had a great idea. When my mother's not looking, I wrapped the egg in a napkin, went over to the garbage, and dropped it in. Went back to my chair, climbed up, and said, "All gone." Well, being new at this, I hadn't wrapped the egg very well, and I left it right on top, where my mother found it. She was furious, and I was an embarrassed baby that I was caught. But I was not deterred. I just knew how to find better techniques. Now, my older sister Janice was a really good eater. She cleaned the plate. Maybe there's a morsel here or there, but that was acceptable. She was free to leave the table. I try to make my plate look like hers without actually eating the food. I rearrange the peas. I put them all on one layer, spread them out to show a lot of plate, move the meat to the edges, all around the edges. My mother was not fooled. So, on to Plan C. Plan C, I put the food in my mouth, pretend to chew, take a paper napkin, pretend to pat my lips, and spit the whole thing out. Now, I did this mainly with liver. And luckily, my mother never noticed how fast the napkins disappeared. Well, then my real reprieve came when we got a dog. We named her Jaja. She was a beautiful blonde mutt. And one of the things I loved about her, she would eat anything. And she loved liver. She soon found the best seat in the house was under the table right next to me. So I would drop the food in my lap, flick it on the floor, and Jaja made it disappear. Now, my mother didn't notice this because we all read at the table. My sister and I read Archie comics, and my mother read the New York Post. But sadly, it turned out my mother was allergic to dogs. We had to give Jaja away. We would have given our mother away. But Jaja couldn't pay the rent. But meanwhile, my mother's obsession with eggs goes on and on. Cold scrambled eggs, poached eggs, hard-boiled eggs, soft-boiled eggs, sunny-side-up eggs, eggs over easy, on and on. Somehow, some reason, raw eggs became popular for a while. People were putting raw eggs on chopped meat, in salad dressing, in drinks. I had another idea. I convinced my mother that the perfect breakfast for me would be a raw egg in chocolate milk. Well, she went to work early and I was left to fix my own concoction, which I did with great style. I pretended I was on the TV show Aunt Josie's Kitchen. And I took the egg and I cracked it deftly with a knife and separated the shells and watched the yolk plop into the drain. Then I measured a glass of milk, no chocolate, and I poured that on top of the egg. Then I turned on the hot water, put my finger on the spigot to make a spray, and I washed the whole thing down. Then, for the grand finale, I took the eggshells and gently placed them on top of the garbage for evidence for my mother. Well, that was very satisfying. But now, I feel badly about all the food I wasted. My single working mother's hard-earned money literally poured down the drain. But somehow, I knew that all those eggs weren't good for me. Now, as for my mother, she's 95 years old. She lives in Hampton Care Nursing Home. She eats eggs every day, and and takes medicine for high cholesterol. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ruby, for bringing it home. So I hope you all enjoyed that. Did you like that? Yeah. They were our guinea pigs and you were our test audience. Should we do this again, do you think? All right, good. Well, September 26th. We do have a date for the next one, so we've got some time. If you're interested in being one of our Raconteurs, you can let us know. And I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And once again, I want to thank all of our storytellers. Paton Miller, Ninatchka Dec, Giana Volpe, Shane Weeks, Minerva Perez, Ruby Jackson, and my partner in crime and our fearless leader, Tom Dunn. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you in September, if not before. Good night, everyone.